Yet another meeting to protect endangered animals from extinction, but this time, will there be enough political will to finally end the illegal trade in wildlife? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. A global convention on protecting the world's endangered species looks like it'll be dominated by how to save elephants and rhinos. The huge demand in Asian countries for ivory tusks and horns has created a vast network of poachers that threatens the great beasts with extinction. The conference has been held in Thailand, which is accused of being one of the worst offenders. Conservationists say the country lies along a key supply route for the illegal trade in ivory that stretches from Africa to its biggest market, China. Thailand now faces international trade sanctions, but the Prime Minister, Yingluck Shinawatra, is promising new laws to combat the lucrative trade in wildlife. The Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, better known as CITES, meets in Bangkok over the next 2 weeks to address this issue and more.
We know that we not only have an issue of urgency, we have an issue of crisis proportions. It is an issue that needs to be addressed proactively, not only in the countries where consumer demand is driving the illegal trade, also in the resource countries, in the transit countries. This is a matter of trying to address a supply chain which, in a terrible way, has become a trade and a business of enormous proportions, $1 billion trade in wildlife species that is analogous to that of the trade in drugs and arms.
The 177 countries that have signed up to the convention are required to enforce all the decisions it makes, but as Tarek Bazley explains, it only works effectively when everyone takes part.
For some countries, signing up to CITES, or the Convention to Protect Wildlife, hasn't been top of the agenda. New countries like East Timor and South Sudan, or small island states like Tonga or Tuvalu, haven't had the time or haven't prioritised joining the convention. For others like Haiti and Iraq, years of instability have put the job of rebuilding the country before protecting threatened wildlife. North Korea hasn't signed up, nor have Tajikistan or Turkmenistan. And Angola's in the process of joining, but for years it's been accused of allowing the export of illegal ivory. The problem is, if all countries are not playing by the same rules, those who trade in endangered plants and animals can use non-member states to organise their smuggling operations. And this, in part, defeats the purpose of the convention and pushes already threatened populations closer to extinction.
Well, the last CITES conference was held here in Qatar in 2010. The big issue back then was a proposal to protect diminishing stocks of Atlantic bluefin tuna with a total trade ban. But the proposal faced fierce opposition from Japan, which is the world's main consumer of tuna in sushi. The country sent a delegation of 30 people, and with a combination of trade incentives, aid packages and claims of cultural bias, Japan convinced other countries to support its opposition. The proposal was dropped. Following the conference, many argued CITES was weak in regulating species of high commercial value and a lot more successful when the species wasn't. Well, joining us now are our guests to talk about this hot topic in Bangkok, where the conference is taking place. We have the Chief of Enforcement Support for CITES, Ben van Rensburg, also in the Thai capital, Wendy Elliott. She's the leader of the World Wildlife Fund's Global Wildlife Trade Campaign, and in Oxford, Anna Nekaris. She's a Professor of Planet Conservation for Oxford Brookes University. Welcome, all three of you. Ben, you're a CITES man. Any chance of getting what you want, to get anything signed and sealed to stop the slaughter, stop the trade?
Well, certainly, I think, as we all know, wildlife crime is currently at historic highs. And we need to take well-coordinated action to address wildlife crime. We are up against a tremendous threat. We have organized transnational criminal networks, groups that have access to resources, and in Central Africa we are now up against armed militant groups. And the only way we can address that is if we increase international cooperation. we need to look at our range countries, our transit countries and destination countries. And that is what we are doing at the moment, is to get these countries to work together and use all the different resources that are available to them. Wildlife forensics, specialized investigation techniques, and a whole range of other tools that has been available to countries, and communication channels provided through Interpol, the World Customs Organization. CITES has partnered up with a number of intergovernmental organizations, including Interpol, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, the World Bank and the World Customs Organization, through an international consortium called the International Consortium on Combating Wildlife Crime. And through this consortium, each of these individual international organizations brings its own skills to this fight against wildlife crime, and to ensure that we deliver a very coordinated response, which is needed to deal with organized crime of this nature.
Okay, I mean, that all sounds very admirable, but isn't this the animal equivalent of COP, the Environment Conference, where there's a lot of largesse, but the incentive to get things done seems to be lacking?
Well, I think there's definitely a drive in recent years, due to the high rise in wildlife crime. We have seen high political interest in wildlife crime. Wildlife crime has historically been a low-risk, high-profit crime. Definitely countries are working on strengthening their legislation, using different kinds of legislation in support of each other to secure stronger deterrent sentences. So there seems to be high political commitment in a number of countries to really make a difference and to strengthen legislation to deal effectively with the threat we are up against now. Obviously, resources from country to country differ a lot. There are some countries that are really in need of support of the international community, but there is very good work being done in several countries. Even here in Thailand, we have recently met with the authorities here from the Secretariat side, and we see a lot of positive developments, databases on DNA being created to deal with wildlife crime, stricter measures being implemented to effectively combat this type of crime.
Wendy, what do you make of that, and do you believe that CITES will be able to help your work in any way, particularly what Ben has targeted there?
I absolutely agree with Ben that on the severity of wildlife crime and its completely altered nature in terms of moving from a small-scale issue to really an organized, transnational, sophisticated crime. And I also very much agree with Ben that the political momentum to address this is definitely growing. We simply would not see so many governments beyond environment ministries talking about this issue even 2 or 3 years ago. But there is still a lot to do, and we are really looking to this particular meeting at a critical point in this crime's development to take concrete measures to make sure governments are held accountable for their commitments under this convention and ensuring this widespread crime does not increase further.
So Anna, the focus this year of CITES certainly is a good one, isn't it, of elephants and rhino. Can you tell us how this crime affects your work on the ground?
Well, the work on the ground is affected by this because the supply chain isn't just an international level. So you have to realize that the wildlife crime is happening at a very local level, from the first poachers who may meet middlemen before it goes to these international suppliers to the wildlife trade. And so part of the thing that needs to happen with CITES is that some more regulations need to come into place to help the countries where the wildlife crime is taking place to find out the exact threat to the species that are being harvested. Because in some cases we have the high-profile species like elephants and rhinos, where we know almost how many may even be left in a country, but then we have other less charismatic, less high-profile species where they've never even been studied in the wild, so the volume of trade that's going out, there's not even a way for countries to measure it in order to be able to implement the CITES laws, no matter how strong they are.
Let's just take a minute to look at some pretty gruesome pictures of what this really looks like, this trade and the slaughter in animals and how it plays out on the ground. I mean, the extreme brutality of it, and the fact that animals have to be killed, those are the ones that are not being transported, and the fact that people allow it to happen. Wendy, who buys this stuff? Do they not know what happens through that supply chain?
Well, this is the absolute million-dollar question, and I do think a lot of people are buying these products without realizing the damage it causes, not just to the animals, of course, but to the people who are living in these countries and are suffering from the impacts of such organized crime, to the rangers who are out risking their lives on a daily basis to protect these animals, and many of them losing their lives. This is the message that we are trying to bring to those consumers, to say these products, which are often status symbols, objects of wealth and power in some circumstances, we want to make sure that people realize the negative association that comes with them and the potential benefits of using other products for such status symbols into the future.
And is it a case of lack of education? Is it a case of stupidity, or is it greed?
I would say it's none of those things for the people who are using these products, because many of them aren't aware that the animals are wild caught. Many people are under the illusion that the animals are captive bred. Others have had a long-term tradition of using the products or are trying to revive cultural traditions to use the products, and they may not be aware at all of the dramatic devastation. So it's not necessarily ignorance, it's also just a different cultural background that the people are coming from that are using the products. And in some cases, it's not even wealthy people. It's, for example, in the exotic bird trade in Indonesia, where I work, it's that every single person wants to have a single bird in their house, and that's a domestic trade. And the domestic trade also is something that CITES cannot cover, but which kills thousands and thousands of animals. And those same animals are the same animals that go into the international trade, say in the case of birds, to often feed exotic pet suppliers. So you may have local users who simply want a bird and they don't really think there's a problem with that, but don't realize that it's the last one in the wild that's there in their cage.
How do you balance cultural concerns with protecting wildlife?
Well, in the case of certain cultural concerns like traditional medicines, there have been huge efforts to, for example, in the case of bear bile, produce synthetics and try to introduce those synthetics into people's idea that it can actually be what they need. And that's something that's going to take some time. We've worked with some groups of local people on a relatively large local scale who say that traditional medicines cure the disease, whereas Western medicines only cure the symptoms. And that's something that's a very long-term belief. So that is then a matter of education and also wealth, allowing them to be able to try the Western medicines and show that they work as well.
Those cultural concerns, Wendy, take us to the CITES conference held here in Qatar, where the ban on tuna was a disaster. And in fact, when Japan won that lack of the ban, bluefin tuna was offered in the social setting. I mean, that's pretty offensive for anyone in the environmental society.
Yes, the resounding defeat of the proposal to list bluefin tuna at CITES at the last COP was a real disappointment, because it showed that the governments that came there were not listening to the science. They weren't using their judgment and the rules of the CITES institution to set decision-making. Decision-making was being done based on economics. And that's a dangerous way to manage international resources that are dwindling, vulnerable, and a shared global resource for us all.
And Wendy, again, what sort of impact does it have on the host country? For example, in Thailand, you've got this unacceptable trade in elephants. Here in Qatar, it doesn't have a strong animal rights record. In fact, many of the rich people here have leopards or cheetahs who are pets. Does hosting this kind of conference have some kind of impact on the way people behave?
Absolutely. I think the wealth of attention that comes with hosting these meetings is an absolute fantastic platform to not only generate political will in a host country, but also reach the civil society in that country. And a great example of that is a petition that we've been running up to the margins of this meeting, asking the Prime Minister of Thailand to ban ivory trade in her country. This petition is now nearly 1.5 million signatures, and a lot of those are from the local Thai people. There is a phrase in Thailand: there would be no Thailand without the elephant. And it's really a special animal here. And I think the momentum that we've seen from the Thai people in supporting this growing call for Thailand not to be the cause of elephant deaths in Africa is really excellent.
Ben, how do you punish people for hunting ivory?
Well, in terms of elephant ivory, certainly any system that's in place need to be well enforced. If you don't enforce it, then you are not going to have control of what's happening on the ground. I think that's what's very encouraging with what's happening in Thailand at the moment. The Secretariat has worked closely with Thailand. We did a mission to Thailand in October 2012, after which we gave certain guidelines to Thailand on measures that we feel would be very useful for them to implement, and we can really see some movement in that regard. A number of registers has been developed, which will definitely improve the controls with regard to ivory in the system. There's been databases developed for live elephants, which is much more comprehensive than the traditional databases that have been used. DNA databases has been developed. But again, no matter how many tools and resources and databases you have, you need to ensure that you are in touch with what happens on the ground, and you need to have proper control over every trader, every wholesaler, every elephant owner in this entire trade system to ensure that you are really able to detect when any illegal ivory moves into such a system.
And the question, Ben, must be how you punish these people, because often the punishment is so small compared to what they get.
Excuse me. Right. Well, obviously, the convention in every country is implemented through its legislation. And that's what I said earlier. Traditionally, wildlife crime has been a low-risk crime. And we often see that penalties are not adequate. So one thing that countries really need to look at is to make sure that in their legislation they have strong and deterrent penalties. And if not, that they revise that legislation to ensure that such strong and deterrent penalties are included in that. Further to that, in South Africa, as an example, different pieces of legislation has been used very effectively to secure strong and deterrent sentences. For example, using organized crime legislation in support of wildlife legislation, which normally makes provision for much harsher and much more deterrent sentences. So I think it's a combination of making sure that your wildlife legislation is strong and in place and have adequate penalties, and also to make use of the other kinds of legislation that exist in your country and use it in support of your wildlife legislation.
Now, there are many animals on the endangered species list, as you can imagine, so let's take a quick look at just a few of them. Native to Eastern and Central Africa, the black rhino is now critically endangered. Its horns are now worth more than gold on the black market. Elephants are being poached for their tusks. The Sumatran elephant is close to extinction. There are now as few as 3,200 tigers in the wild threatened by the destruction of their habitat. Bluefin tuna, which we spoke about, faces extinction as a result of overfishing. A Japanese delicacy, one fish weighing 222 kilograms, recently fetched $1.75 million at auction. And the giant panda is the rarest member of the bear family. Forests that have been fragmented have left many of the animals isolated, preventing them from mating. What about, Anna, a model for regulated trade? Would that work?
A model for regulated trade would be very difficult because it has to be done on a country-by-country basis. And I think this is part of the problem with countries being able to implement their own laws, because CITES can provide them with the framework, but when there's corruption within a country that implements its own laws, even if it had an international framework to help these highly threatened species, you have so many layers within a country that can prevent these things from happening. So even if the laws exist, and in many of these countries already where wildlife crime is happening at a very large scale, they have the best laws in the world to protect the species. They have incredible laws in place already to prosecute people, but they simply don't do it. And very often the only prosecution is taking the animals away, and then that person will just go replace them with more. And so I think it's possible, but it would have to be done very carefully at a country-by-country basis, considering the intricacies of the cultures, and also considering also what is the main reason animals are being traded in that country. For some countries it's more traditional medicines, for others it's food, for others it's pets, and some have all three, and some really just serve as the port where those animals go through. So that's why it's such a complex issue.
And as you say, complex is not just the trade, it's not just the killing. Wendy, I mean, they also, when you talk about tigers, one of the biggest problems is how you balance the relationship between man and the tiger. If the tiger is killing man because of the fact that they're encroaching on their space, how do you ever stop that slaughter?
Yes, that's a very good question. And of course, with these large charismatic mammals, most of us in the Western world don't live with them in our back garden, but some people do. And with tigers, in terms of them eating people's livestock, with elephants who can eat an entire village's set of crops overnight, this is a real issue. But there are many novel solutions to managing this, and people have also lived alongside these animals for generations. So it's a matter of using those traditional techniques combined with some new techniques. For example, using beehives around farms, which elephants don't like, so they stay away. There's really a good possibility of managing these mosaic landscapes of people and wildlife so that both can live in harmony.
And what about parks that are highly policed, highly secured?
Yes, absolutely, and this is the problem of the wildlife crime dynamic that we're seeing now. Some of the parks in Africa are literally like war zones in many respects. The level of enforcement that the rangers have to apply to combat the poachers that are really highly militarized is incredible. And really the only solution to that is addressing the end of the trade chain, getting at the demand. It's a common phrase, when the demand stops, the killing will too, but it's very true. And this is what we're really looking for here in Thailand, elsewhere in Asia, to reach out to people and encourage them not to buy illegal wildlife products.
Because you also hear horrifying stories about the amount of animals who, when they do, if they make it to the destination, about 90% of them are lost, that 90% of them die anyway when they get to their destination. Ben, I mean, what sort of impact is it going to have on the world if we lose these animals?
Well, I think once they're gone, they're gone. We need to put measures in place now to make sure that these animals remain in the world with us. Currently, as you know, our elephant populations are under severe threat. If we don't respond in a well-coordinated fashion using the legislation that we have available to our benefit and to address these crimes, to make sure that we get strong deterrent penalties, to ensure that we change wildlife crime from a low-risk, high-profit crime to a crime that really is addressed as a very serious crime, which it is. And that's the only way to stop this wave. And then, of course, to also show to the users of the products that come from this wildlife. I think there's a lot of traditional users which is there to stay, but I'm sure if you can show the impact of what is happening to those users, that they would maybe change their mind in terms of using these products.
Anna, if you could look to the positive side of things, do you think we can pull ourselves back from the brink here, and is there success in sight?
Well, I think we can look at some success stories, and we can also see that humans change. If we actually look at Western society just 100 or 200 years ago, and the level of hunting that people did when they went out into these destinations where they're wildlife rich, or 500 years ago when we decimated our own wildlife, but it's come back to a recovery sort of stage in reserves and in national parks in say Europe, for example. We have changed our mind and our opinion and our attitude about use of animals. And even in traditional Western medicines there were uses of animals, and those have changed. And so
well, we're going to leave it to all three of you to push the CITES agenda and put a stop to this unnecessary bloodshed. Thank you very much to my guests in Bangkok, Ben van Rensburg, also in Bangkok, Wendy Elliott, and in Oxford, Anna Nekaris. And of course, thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. If you want to send us your feedback, just email your thoughts to us at inside story at aljazeera.net. I'm Jane Dutton. Thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.